So for each situation, cost savings, increases in efficiency, as well as increases in revenue, those are the typical drivers for modernizing, but they have to be quantified to make a sound business decision, and every case is different. So cost savings can come from reduced labor, so your efficiency there, improvement in business process, reduced hardware, like you might not need that physical server, that virtual server, or old machine, or the old scanners in the warehouse. Reduced software costs, so licensing. Sometimes you won't need some of the software, the older software. So the potential for savings is unique to each evaluation. We've seen modernization efforts break even. We've seen them save a company thousands, and we've even seen it save millions. Hidden costs of a legacy system. So first thought is labor. Does it take an employee longer to do their job with the legacy system? So we had an e-commerce distribution customer. Their daily order import from their web orders was so manual, it took 4 hours for one person to get the prior day's orders out to into the system and out to the warehouse for picking and shipping. So high labor costs. Another hidden cost might be technical resources, like people and machines, or mostly machines. But we had a client who had to maintain a Windows 95 machine on the shop floor because the software they were using out there to ship wouldn't run on anything newer. So they had to maintain old hardware, and they had to keep someone around who knew how to manage that. Not probably, the biggest hidden cost of a legacy system is risk. And this is, I don't know how you price risk. So some examples of what the cost might be. What if the operating system or the software update, what if an operating system or software update renders the old application unusable? You come in, an update's been applied, and now the software that you're using to run your warehouse or to ship no longer works because of some new update. So it's a risk as you get older and older software. What if a vulnerability in a third-party component? Think OpenSSL a few years ago. But what if it's too old to fix and the vendor won't fix it, and you're left with a vulnerable piece of software or component? Again, risk. What if there's no one to support your old source code? So maybe you've got source code in an old technology, or let's say COBOL or Dexterity. The number of developers who can support those, it's diminishing over time. So the hidden costs of legacy system, labor, tech resources, most importantly, risk. So mitigating risk. First, include your users in the process. They have to buy in that the new system is going to help them, and it needs to help them. If your users aren't bought in, you're facing an uphill battle. Second, get clear on your processes. So software models process. Many times we find that the process was changed to accommodate the system or software. So when you're modernizing and putting in new software, you get a chance to optimize your process. You don't want to let the tail wag the dog and let the software determine the process. Software should model the process. And mitigation of risks. Test. So probably the last one is test. Test. So you're putting in new software, you're replacing others, you may have changed business process. You must test. So where possible, a phased migration where you're doing pieces and parts of it. You're breaking it into components, implementing what you can while leaving the other components, the legacy components, running the system. So not always possible, but we look to that first. Another option might be a parallel implementation, if you can tolerate it, depending on how onerous that is on your users. So that often requires that users do dual entry into one system, entry into the other, and make sure that they're both lining up. So that sometimes will work. If the implementation is going to require a hard cutover, extensive testing, extensive training, users need to have time with a new system. If you're going to change out a new system, they need to be comfortable with it. You need to have identified all the business process gaps before you go live. Anything where the software is modeling the process differently, you need to have all that worked out before going live. And then finally, even if you have to have a hard go live, a soft cutover. So you're going to cut over, but you really would like to have a fallback plan. So typically that means you're keeping the existing system in place and you're cutting over and you're watching very carefully and you have a plan for rolling back. So those are the strategies that we would typically employ to provide a smooth transition into a new system. So this is sort of like the first question where it depends, right? Cost savings, increased efficiency, increased revenue, they all have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So sometimes you might choose to run inefficient because it costs less to pay labor than develop. We've seen that. Sometimes you're forced to modernize. So let's say that it is cheaper to do labor but the system that you're running on is going to fall out of support or you fear it may stop working. So sometimes you're forced. You have to scrap the old application and build or purchase a new one. So really getting numbers for these metrics, how much you're going to save, any increases in efficiency, increases in revenue because you can do more with your new system, you can scale up. That's going to determine the pace and level at which you're going to modernize. So I can't give you a definitive answer on how long it would take to recoup investments, other than to say that needs to be part of your step one of your evaluation. So let me end with an example of that. So last week we had a client in the office, and great illustration of the importance of evaluating the processes. So they reviewed a process where employees were printing documents, PDFs, I think, signing them like with ink, scanning them back in, and then sending them by electronic mail to the recipients. So they measured how much time each employee were spending on this task. They added up the cost of the ink, or the toner, and the paper, and they determined that this single process was costing them, I think it's like several million a year, like a couple, maybe between 2 and 3 million a year. So that really drove them to look at what would it look like to implement electronic signing and document management software. And so obviously the payoff on that's going to be pretty quick with a $3 million a year spend.